Look closely at the expanding skyline of any major African metropolis today, and you are watching history accelerate. This chart shows global population trajectories. By 2050, the continent's population will reach 2.5 billion. This demographic pyramid reveals the real story. The massive concentration of people under 30 represents a youth dividend packed with entrepreneurial energy and technical innovation. To channel this workforce, leaders established the African Continental Free Trade Area, aiming to integrate 54 nations into a single cohesive economic bloc. But an integrated market of that scale requires a baseline of absolute structural stability. Trade routes and supply chains collapse if border disputes or internal conflicts erupt. The ambition for a stable, unified continent is rooted deeply in Pan-Africanism, a philosophy centered on humanism, strong collective reliance, and the peaceful resolution of disputes. Early visionaries, like Kenneth Kaunda and other independence leaders, argued that Africa needed indigenous mechanisms to solve its own political crises. Yet, philosophical ideals cannot secure a landmass this vast. To manage the complex politics of a rapidly growing continent, those ideals have to be engineered into binding institutional machinery. In the year 1963, continental leaders established the Organization of African Union. For newly independent states guarding against colonial meddling, state sovereignty was the highest priority. The OAU operated on a strict legal doctrine of non-interference, which created a paralyzing legal barrier. If a state faced internal collapse or committed atrocities against its own citizens, the OAU was legally barred from stepping in. To fix this flaw, leaders dismantled the OAU and launched the modern African Union in 2002. The foundational text rewrote the rules of engagement. The critical update in Article 4H of the Constitutive Act grants the African Union the legal right to intervene in a member state under grave circumstances, specifically war crimes, genocide, and crimes against humanity. The continent had officially shifted its governing geopolitical theory. The era of non-interference was replaced by a legal mandate for non-indifference. A legal mandate to intervene is useless without the physical institutions to enforce it. The AU built the African Peace and Security Architecture. At its center sits the Peace and Security Council. Below it are supporting pillars: a Continental Early Warning System, African Standby Force, and Peace Fund. A final distinct pillar operates differently: the Panel of the Wise. First proposed in the 1991 Kampala document, the panel is a formal diplomatic body with deep cultural roots. It translates the indigenous African tradition of a council of elders, where respected figures guide a community through internal disputes, into a modern geopolitical tool. By integrating institutional formality with regional diplomatic tradition, the AU created a hybrid system designed specifically for the continent's unique challenges. Policy analysts often assume the Panel of the Wise functions as a rapid response conflict mediation team, parachuting into active war zones to negotiate treaties. The legal parameters in Article 11 of the 2002 Protocol outline a different function. The panel operates in a strictly advisory capacity to the Peace and Security Council and the chairperson. Their lane is the prevention of conflicts, working upstream before violence breaks out. The modalities for membership reflect this role. The 5 panel members must be highly respected across the continent, completely independent, and no longer politically active in their home countries. Former heads of state, chief justices, and veteran diplomats fill these seats. They carry immense gravity, unburdened by current electoral pressures. That diplomatic weight is intentionally reserved for quiet, preventative advisory work, rather than the reactive mechanics of mid-conflict negotiation. The primary operational function of the Panel of the Wise is a process called horizon scanning. Uniquely, the panel possesses the statutory power to pronounce itself on looming issues at its own initiative, without waiting for the Peace and Security Council to grant permission. This timeline charts a crisis life cycle, from a latent phase into escalation and violent conflict. The panel's operational territory sits entirely here, in the latent phase. Once a situation tips into escalation, the African Union deploys special envoys and mediators to handle the crisis. During horizon scanning, the panel identifies unseen structural vulnerabilities, like approaching disputed elections or gaps in transitional justice, and sounds the alarm. Ultimately, the measure of the panel's success is a conflict that never actually materializes, and a crisis that never reaches the desk of an active mediator. Since its launch in 2007, the panel has matured into a stable institution. Today, its secretariat frequently operates like a mediation support unit, generating doctrinal guidelines and trainings to the entire continent. To scale this architecture beyond headquarters in Addis Ababa, the African Union created the Pan-African Network of the Wise, or PANWISE. This map shows how the PANWISE network links the Continental Panel to similar mechanisms operating inside regional economic communities. This decentralization puts localized prevention teams closer to the ground, while keeping them aligned under a unified continental standard. Keeping an architecture of this scale functioning requires intense diplomatic alignment across 54 sovereign states. By 2050, the continent's population will reach 2.5 billion, carrying with it a massive economic potential that depends entirely on stability. Realizing the promises of a united, prosperous Africa ultimately relies on the invisible, continuous machinery of anticipatory prevention.